Happy 4th of July. This is the day we celebrate the birth of our nation, which is, interestingly enough, a contested thing these days. There's been some talk and movement to discredit America that's founded by Americans. It's interesting. There's even a historian now saying that America should never have fought the revolution, but should have just stayed with the British. And the idea behind that is that America has done so many evil and bad things that if it had never been a nation, or been a nation slowly, stayed under Britain as long as possible, it would have matured rather than become combative and taken on the ideals of capitalism and greed and manifest destiny, all the great evils of the American society, and then all of these things wouldn't have happened. We would have been in Canada, I think is the argument, which is not only nearsighted, it's just plain ignorant. And I don't think it's intentionally bad. I think there's good intention there, and I get it, but it's just ignorant. I mean, it's awesomely ignorant, really. And I think the reason, because we don't appreciate July 4th, is because we try to put July 4th into 2017, and it doesn't make any sense. We live in an era now of multinationalism. We live in an era now of human rights. We live in an era of individualism, individual expression and autonomy and exploration and all these things. And so if you take those ideals of individual expression and individuality, and you plop them back in 1776, you go, what is this revolution? It makes no sense. In fact, we go pawing through the original documents trying to find examples of people that would have fit well into 2017. Great American idealists. And so the place we typically run to is Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence, where all men are created equal. He said, look, see, therefore, he had the idea of equality. He had slaves, and so, he turns out to be one of these great hypocritical white men, which is perfect for the, modern day progressive historians. But the point is, you're looking for the wrong thing. That's not what July 4th is about. And what we celebrate now, these ideals, are great in 2017. He never would have worked in the 1770s. It wouldn't have made any sense in the 1770s. And the reason why statements like, that, like a rejection of our own independence, is mind-numbingly ignorant is because it's entirely out of context. And it's one thing I find very frustrating about this culture is that it takes no time to understand the context in which something happens. It just grabs it out and then drops it, the past, and drops 2017 and goes, this is crap, we never would have done this. So I thought maybe it was worth a moment just to say what actually happened on July 4th in 1776. Why was that such a revolutionary moment? It was one of the most important moments in human history. Ralph Waldo Emerson called the gunshots fired at Concord, the shot heard around the world. And he wasn't wrong about that. What that started in the 1770s and early 1800s was a human revolution that started some precedents that were crucial to the coming of civil rights, crucial to the coming of free states and independence. It was a important step away from the aristocratic sort of hierarchical societies that we find prior to 1776 across Europe and the West, which have all now crumbled. And we're living in sort of pseudo-republican states across the world. Why? Because of what happened in 1776. And so if you don't understand what we were accomplishing then, we won't understand why what we've created is so important. We think that if you just live life equally and love people somehow, you just have human society, and that's just not the case. Human society as it was developing in the West in the 18th century was a society based on authority and hierarchy. In other words, all authority has authority inherent in it. So you have an aristocracy that's born to it, you have a royalty that's born to it. It may not be quite feudal by the 1750s and 60s, but still there's this understanding, as King George was very clear with the colonists about when he responds to the colonists in the summer of 1775. When he says basically, this is after, it's 1765, after he repeals the Stamp Act, this Declaratory Act he passed in 1765, and he says, 1766, he says, King and Parliament have the right to do whatever we want. And it wasn't the idea that King and Parliament were doing bad things necessarily. As a matter of fact, looking up to 1776, England had actually reduced taxes in different ways, specifically trade import duties through the navigation system, and actually conferred in the Townshend duties, conferred to the colonies about how to pass low taxes to make the colonists happy. Well, the colonists said to the Townshend duties in 67 was it doesn't matter what price you put on us, it's how you put the tax on us. And what Americans were doing, and there's a wonderful history that goes back from, if you want to really peg the date, you'd have to look at somewhere like 1760, 1761, where the first argument started to come up about the fact that it's not the laws themselves that's the problem, it's how the laws are passed that's the problem. That you can pass a law from England saying you have to tax shipping, that's fine. But as long as it goes through our legislatures. In other words, authority is not inherently authoritative. And so Americans will draw a distinction. And if once you draw this distinction, then you can start talking about civil rights. Then you can start talking about liberty and independence and individualism. And the distinction they draw is between authority and power. And what the colonists are saying, what Jefferson will say, and what Madison will be saying, is that even if you have power, that doesn't mean you have authority. Authority is the right to wield power. Power is just because you have it. And that's a revolutionary concept, because in the medieval time, up until this period, power is authority. If you have it, it's granted you by God, or it's granted you by succession or traditional laws or something, tradition, that great well and resource of power. Where if you have it, you have authority. And so because the king is in power, he has authority over the colonists. The colonists say no. They have decided on something different. And so when Jefferson says in 76, all men are created equal, he's not saying, maybe his fault for not seeing it, he's not saying everyone is equal. What he's saying is no one has inherent power and therefore inherent authority. Everyone starts from nothing. And then you have to build up to power and authority. And you can build up to power, and that's fine, but that may be illegitimate. The question is, how do you build up to authority? And once you have authority, you have the right to wield it. Once you have that concept, now you can start holding authorities, say powers, accountable. Are you wielding it right? If you're not, then you go down and we start something different. So America starts this revolution in 1776 to say that powers have to be legitimate. And if you're not legitimate, then you don't deserve to be paid. If you don't start from that, and we can, you can say, boy, if you were back then and you say, hey, we believe in equality for all people, it wouldn't have made any sense in that day and age, in that environment, in that political world, in that historical world. It makes no sense whatsoever. America, actually, I shouldn't say that. The French tried that. And I know there's a lot of debate over the French Revolution and what it means. But I think one of the keys to the French Revolution was an intention to create an equal society. And inside the framework of a hierarchical Europe, we'll see how badly that went. And there's reasons, and that's for another post, and I'll explain that to go over the French Revolution. But what America did, and this is quite boring, I realize, but it is changes the fate of human history up to this date. Now that may go away, the republics may die, we may be back in some authoritative pseudo-medieval state at some point, which I wouldn't be surprised. Humanity, history is cyclical. But what the American revolutionaries did was they said, and this is, they studied the Greeks. This came right out of Herodotus. When Herodotus talks about a Greek general that was captured by Xerxes, the Persians were coming in to capture Greece, and Xerxes is a huge army, massive, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and the Greeks are little piddly, the Athenians, little islands. They've got a handful of soldiers. They got no army to speak of really. And Xerxes asks this Greek general, why do you fight? You can't win. More than that, says Herodotus, Xerxes reminds the Greeks, if I win, all you have to do is pay me some money, to say that I'm your king, and then I go back to Persia. And then you get the reward of being defended and protected, and you get part of our trade and part of our economy. In other words, if you simply give in to Xerxes' authority, you have everything to gain. Protection, money, why do it? If you fight, you're going to lose, and you're going to lose your country, and then you're going to become oppressed by me. So he asks this Greek general, why do you fight? It makes no sense. And Herodotus, through the voice of Demaratus, remember the general's name, says, because the Greeks fear only one monarch, and that king is the law. The law. The law is king. In other words, the law is true for everybody. It's a procedural thing. If you have power. If you want authority, then you have to do it inside the law. And the law is king, says Herodotus. And this is what the colonists were repeating. When Jefferson says all men are created equal, what he's saying is the law. If you look at the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, when he says the laws of nature and nature's God, that's the law. That law is true for everyone. We all face gravity. We all face hunger. We all face consistency. If you break laws, then laws broken hurt you. That is the natural base for all humanity. And what the Americans did was say that base is true for everyone. And we're going to create a government that honors that law system. And therefore it's true for everybody. And the procedures of voting and coming into power and going out of office, whether these are corrupt people, whether the laws are good laws or bad laws, Americans don't say. And Jefferson says, what happens to slavery? Jefferson says, well, over time it goes away. I don't know. But the American Revolution never promised equality. That was never its ambition. What it promised was a procedure, a process where law is king, where no one is above the law, where the law sets down, and if you can affect the law and write the law, then everyone has to abide by it. One of the problems that we're seeing now, we saw in the French Revolution, is when you say we have to have equality, the person that makes equality happen, in order to do it, has to be above the law. This is Rousseau, right out of his Social Contract, the legislator. Has to be above the law because the law is crooked. Someone needs to come in above it and say, I'm going to make everyone equal. Because laws will always be taken over by interest groups, laws will always be taken over by poor legislators and bad people, and therefore laws will always be corrupt. And in the French version, equality is above the law. But in the American version, in Jefferson's and Madison's and Adams' view, and Ben Franklin's and Benjamin Rush's view, in their view, the law is supreme. Whether you get equality is up in the air. But if you start with the law, then that can be changed. Laws can be adjusted. Votes can happen. Adjustments can happen. Change can develop. But once you put someone in power and you say, I entrust you to make us equal, there's no way you can stop that person. There's no gatekeeper to stop the almighty monarch who will make us all equal. No one can stop Robespierre in Paris. Well, until in 1794 they captured him and cut his head off. So July 4th represents a revolution in thought, a revolution in politics, a revolution in human society, where process is king, law is king. We all submit to that same law. Now, that doesn't mean the laws are just. It doesn't mean you're going to get equality. But the only other alternative to law is king is someone is king. And Americans traditionally, now it's changing now, dramatically, but what Americans have always said up till now in recent years is that law is king. And even if the law is bad and it doesn't get us what we want and it makes us unequal and it makes some people rich and some people poor, I'd rather have that because that can change. Now what you're talking about is someone being made king, and then there's no way to stop that. And I please hear me, I'm not downplaying in any way the evils that have happened, the evils of slavery. I'm not downplaying the evils of, sort of wild run amok, social Darwinism at the end of the 19th century. I feign to call it capitalism, that's for another post. But those sorts of things, they're evil, and there's no doubt about it. But the argument is that changes, and it's true. Look what happens. So we have civil society changing laws, and the electorate becoming educated and learning and changing, and we have the development of civil rights, and these things happen. That's because you have a law system, and that's what Jefferson was trying to create, a system based on predictable laws. And once that structure and framework is in place, no one rises above it. And that keeps everyone, in Jefferson's sense, equal. So July 4th is a revolution. That asset, will cut across nations, traditions, kings, aristocracies all across the globe. When people realize, hey, wait a minute, no power is legitimate just because it's powerful. It has to become authority, and it only gets authority if it abides by the law. That is a fabulous revolution, and unfortunately this generation doesn't get that, or many of our own scholars are blinded by our own 21st century value system to not appreciate that you have to get first through the American Revolution before you can get to anything called civil rights, anything called an equal society. And if we lose that, and by the way, here's the greater fear for me, if we lose, we can denigrate the American Revolution, but if we lose that sense of process and procedure, the only thing left is to empower kings to make us equal. And historically speaking, putting in power kings, getting rid of authority, putting in power kings to make us equal is a bad deal. It's a kind of deal that leads to Pol Pot, it's a kind of deal that leads to Stalin, to Madaris down in Venezuela, it leads to Castro in Cuba. All of these people, Hitler included, all of them said, hey, the law's not good enough. Put me in power and I will find a way to give us everything we want. I will make us equal, I will make us happy, I will push us forward. And the law then comes to second place under that authority. And once that happens, there's no way to contain power. The founders are very clear that power corrupts. And that's a Puritan view, it's a Calvinist view. but it's humanly verifiable. That if you, no matter how good the person is, if you give them ultimate power, you'll end up in a corrupt society. And one that is unchangeable, one that is unreformable. And what Americans have put in is what the Reformation started, really, in a sense, semper reformans. It can always reform if the law is the law. And once you have someone in power who makes whatever promise they can make about equality, about wonderful things in the future, and you'll have everything you want, and high minimum wages, I don't care what it is. Whatever promise that person, if you give them power above the law to do it, there's no stopping that person from corrupting the entire system. But the Americans believe that process and the rule of law is far superior. May not be better. I'll go with Winston Churchill on this, right? Democracy is the worst of all possible systems. The worst system except for all the rest. In other words, democracy is horrible, but all the ones are worse than that. And the rule of law is far better. Even if the outcome is poor, even if the situation doesn't work out for you, it's far better than having a monarch. We can disagree, I suppose, on that, but I would say that, historically speaking, what the American Revolution started is a reformable society and reformable republics. And that is something to celebrate on this 4th of July.